Hello, folks. Welcome to Business Spotlight. I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic guest today who's absolutely nailed and helped all of his clients to have a strong e-commerce presence. I'm delighted to be joined by the co-founder of Supplyant, Simon Morton. Simon, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining. Why don't you share us the story behind how you started Supplyant?
So Supplyant started many years ago off the back of us having a business which was in car parts. So we actually sold car parts for a long time. And as we evolved through that journey, rather than working with selling car parts on behalf of somebody else, we took that business on, extended it. And as the credit crunch kicked in with the kind of the max power generation, we actually worked with an action coach at that point who suggested what might be nice is why don't you offer this advice to other people, which we did. And now we're servicing at any point in time, probably 100 different people trying to sell stuff online.
So you've really kind of cracked that, right? You're ahead of the curve. I'm sure it wasn't all a straightforward journey, though. How have you overcome some of the kind of challenges that you've faced? What were those challenges, and how did you address them?
I think in the early days, the challenges are very much about a lack of belief in the internet, full stop, which seems pretty crazy now. But certainly over the period of the last 10, 15 years, really the challenge has been finding the right caliber of people to work with and the right members of staff to work with us, because it's an industry that moves pretty quickly.
You just mentioned you've got a large customer base, over 100 clients at any one time. How did you build such a strong customer base, and how did you maintain or build such a strong brand in what is a very competitive industry?
Well, I think in reality, there's kind of two scenarios. The first scenario was getting out there. Winning that first customer was super hard. Winning the second and third was pretty hard. Then you start to build some reputation where it becomes less about having to outreach in a traditional fashion and more about referrals into peer groups that actually bring customers to you rather than you chasing them. So having a very big circle of friends in business has been pretty powerful.
We'll come back to relationships in a second. But you're in a notoriously fast-moving industry, Simon. How do you foster a culture of innovation and creativity within the business?
Well, I think it's inherent. When we employ people, we're coming into areas where things like TikTok didn't even exist a few years ago. So there is no training program for this. You can't put people onto courses. The closest, from my sort of mind, the closest rationale on that is there's a kind of almost like an engineering mindset to this, which is there is a problem, figure that problem out, because the rules of the game are going to be the same for all similar things, and then put processes in place to actually optimize it once you've kind of figured it out. So it's a tricky industry because so much new comes along and so much changes.
You talked a lot there about those kind of pivotal moments. Were there any decisions that significantly impacted on the growth of the business, on the journeys you went along?
Yeah, probably the biggest one was around the COVID time. We'd been through a stage of trying to grow the business fairly significantly. Applying those normal rules of get your management team in place, get the right structure in place. And in reality, that just didn't work for us in our industry. There's a good reason why most agencies sit around the £1 to £2 million mark. And that reason is that for us, managers who can't do is not really a workable scenario because you can't bill for those people. So actually taking a decision to say, rather than being one big business, let's be lots of small businesses was the right move for us. And that foundationally changed how we're approaching things.
You mentioned COVID. I'm sure the path hasn't always been a bed of roses, right? It's not always been a straight one. There must have been some failure or setback along the way. So how do you handle failure and setback, and what lessons have you learned from it?
Well, I think things go wrong, and there's many things that go wrong that are out of your control completely, particularly when you're dealing with kind of third parties looking at hosting and things like that. I think in all honesty, for me, there's an emotional bank account that you hold with customers. And the more that you do right, the more times you do something above and beyond the normal, when something does go wrong, that pays you back in that bank account. So build some value with your customers, build a strong relationship with them. They understand then that this isn't on purpose. This is something that's just happened and needs to be dealt with. And just dealing with it is very important. And in our industry, also very inconvenient because things break at the worst times.
Hey, look, you built a fantastic business with a big customer base and a strong team. I know that you're extremely busy as an entrepreneur and you're busy in your family life as well. How on earth do you maintain some level of work-life balance?
Well, I'll be honest with you, Matt, my work-life balance is pretty rubbish. When you're building a business and it still feels like a startup even now in that sense, I'm lucky enough that my kids have all now pretty much left home or just sit in their rooms and play games at night. My wife's in bed by 9:30. My marvelous challenge is I love what I do, and I don't mind working late because I enjoy what I do. Most of my customers I would happily go to the pub with because they're good people, and that makes life easy. So working hard is not a chore for me; it's more of a pleasure. But equally, it's something I know I've got to address in the future is that you can't keep doing it like this forever.
Your business is all about helping other businesses to grow. Can you share either some effective strategies that you're seeing working well in your clients or strategies that have worked well in your own business?
The Action Coach 5 ways are appropriate everywhere. Even now in this kind of space here, we're still looking at where do we find leads and how do we convert them in that sense at the earliest part of that. So finding leads is for us as much about the groups we hang out with, and converting them a referred customer in is 100 times easier to convert than a new one that you just found off the street.
You mentioned earlier on in the session, you talked about how important relationships were. Could you just talk a little bit about, the impact and how that's really impacted on your entrepreneurial journey?
Yeah, there's kind of one moment for me. We got used to dealing with super startups, people who have got nothing and wanted to go into kind of get up to the next stages, and we got pretty good at that. But there was a moment as part of our journey where we didn't feel like we could go and approach bigger customers. So we got used to the sort of 0 to 5 million type customers. There was a bit of a mental block as to how on earth do we deal with those bigger ones? We don't understand them. At that point, I joined another network that was dealt with bigger customers. And once you get in front of those sort of guys and you're talking the same language to those guys, they still trust you. And that journey carries on now with dealing with even bigger customers and corporates. They still have the same problems. They generally know less than the small ones, as far as I can see. And it's getting rid of that kind of imposter syndrome and saying there's no reason why I can't talk to these people. I know what I'm doing.
You're in a notoriously fast-moving industry, Simon. How on earth do you stay up to date with the latest trends and make sure that your business is remaining competitive?
The trends one's an interesting one because in our industry, although it updates a lot, that information is everywhere. So even the example of things like ChatGPT is a good example. You can wait for it to come around, get some training on it, but that's just not the way it works. The best way as ever is to throw yourself into it, try and understand it, because if you're understanding it quickly, that's going to get you to where you want to get to, rather than waiting for it to appear and actually have that training you need. So all of our customers demand we know about these things, and they will ask us about them. So we listen to the jungle drums, and if we're hearing about it, we're going to go and find out about it.
One last question, Simon. What advice would you give if you could do it all over again, what advice would you give to your 18-year-old self?
The advice I would give to my 18-year-old self, and probably one of those foundational things that we've learned over the years, is if a member of staff or a customer isn't right, cut it off quickly. It's a painful experience in terms of the hijacking of a team when there is one person who is not good enough and is hijacking conversations and isn't productive. So over the years, you get much more comfortable with saying that this is just not the right person and they need to move on.
Simon, great advice. Thank you so much for coming on today and to share all of your learnings. It's been absolutely fantastic to have you as a guest.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Folks, if you'd like to come and join us on Business Spotlight and share your story in the way that Simon has just done, we'd love to see you. Just comment apply below. We'll be in contact and we'll follow up and get an interview scheduled with you. Until then, we'll speak to you next time. Bye for now.